Good afternoon. I appreciate you joining me this afternoon. I asked Assistant Secretary John Cooper and the head of our Family Safety Program Office to be with me, Alan Abramowitz. Also, I believe on the phone is Dr. Jim Sewell, who chairs the work group that I appointed. Jim is in Austin, but I also have our Assistant Secretary for Substance Abuse and Mental Health, Bill James, who is also on the work group, as well as Dr. Rajid Tandon, who is a psychiatrist who serves on that work group. When I learned about the death of 7-year-old Gabriel Myers, who apparently hanged himself in his foster parents' home in Margate, I was stunned. It is incomprehensible to me, even now, to understand how a child so young may have deliberately and consciously made a decision to end his life. Anyone who's heard of Gabriel's story, I know, is in disbelief. And parents everywhere are wondering themselves, how could this have happened? Normally, a 7-year-old boy is learning to read and tie his shoes, not contemplating death. Immediately following Gabriel's death, I appointed a work group chaired by Dr. Jim Sewell, former Assistant Commissioner of FDLE, to review all available information relating to Gabriel's death and life. I asked the work group to conduct a full inquiry into all the facts of the case, including the contributing effects of psychotherapeutic drugs and child-on-child sex abuse. If you look at this little boy's life, in the space of a couple weeks, he was told that his mother had lost visitation rights, that he was going back to Ohio, where he says he was sexually abused by a 12-year-old, a change in psychotropic or psychotherapeutic medications from one black box warning labeled drug to another. He changed therapists. He moved from one foster home into another and into a third, and he was told he had to cut his hair, and he lost his toys. I don't care how old you are. That much change in that space of time can be traumatic. At the hearing of the first meeting of the Sewell work group, someone referred to this little boy as a troubled little boy. And I read in the newspaper a comment by our Assistant Secretary, Bill James, who said, no, this little boy wasn't troubled. He lived in a troubled environment. And that raises, I think, some serious questions, and I think the work group is working tirelessly, and so far I'm very impressed with their results. I want to say at the outset, I'm not going to prejudge their findings or whatever recommendations may come out of that. I think we've got to do this right. We've got to do it deliberately. But some disturbing things have already emerged. Gabriel's physician had prescribed several psychotherapeutic drugs, and none of this information was reflected in our database. There was also no evidence in Gabriel's file that the statutorily required parental consent or a court order were obtained. As a result, I ordered several weeks ago a review of all case files on every child to determine the following. Number one, the total number of children in out-of-home foster care on psychotherapeutic drugs. Number two, whether information about the children's prescriptions are reflected accurately in our database, and whether a signed parental consent form or court order was obtained authorizing the administration of those drugs as required by statute. This report is an important first step in closely examining not only this case, but in helping to assure that this kind of tragedy never happens again. None of that, however, goes to the basic question as to the efficacy of the administration of those drugs in the first place, and that is a critical question I've directed be reviewed by the Sewell work group. We have not determined whether those drugs were a factor in Gabriel's death, but regardless, this department has a responsibility to monitor the use of these drugs and ensure the overall care, treatment, and safety of children in our care. We have distributed the findings of the review that I directed be done. Some of the key findings are in the summary that we're providing you today, but two of them are particularly important to me. First, the report indicates that about 13% of the over 20,000 children in out-of-home foster care are taking one or more psychotherapeutic medication. That is a significant number. And though, as I've already indicated, I have little confidence on our past data, it appears to be a reduction from where we were 4 years ago, when the legislature's concern about this led to the passage of the current statute. And it is also lower than other states. For instance, in Tennessee, my understanding that 41% of children ages 13 to 17 are on some one or more psychotherapeutic medications. The issue of psychotherapeutic medications for children is, as everyone here knows, a national issue, not just in foster care either. But none of that means that we can relax, not by any means. Florida, above all, needs to get it right. We need to constantly keep the face of Gabriel Myers continually in our minds and in our hearts and get this right. We need to go from this tragedy to start really setting the standard for the nation on how to deal with this issue. Second, the first thing we have to do is bring every single case of a foster child into compliance with the law. Our current review indicates that about 16% of Florida's foster children who are on psychotherapeutic medications do not have either parental consent or a court order. That is unacceptable. Gabriel Myers and all of Florida's children deserve better. I've directed that our attorneys for Children's Legal Services begin working with case workers at partner agencies to obtain those consents from parents and file a status report with the courts by next Friday. We need to get updated treatment plans on some of these kids before we can expect final approval from the courts. But we are moving forward on that as quickly as we can. I've asked that we immediately, in every case, with every case manager, schedule new appointments with physicians for each of these children and the therapist for any child that we do not have parental consent or a court order. I am also communicating today with every dependency judge in Florida, notifying them of the action that we are taking and requesting their assistance in expediting this judicial review. Meanwhile, we also need to look at the quality of our information. We need to make sure that parents are not just signing a consent form, but really understand what they're signing. In the case of Gabriel's mom, when she was pulled out of the car, her child was taken away from her. She was high on drugs, it's my understanding. Drugs were found in the car, and she signed a standard medical consent form, which was not specific consent. My concern at that point in time, a mom will sign anything. So it is not just enough to get a signed parental consent form. It must clearly be informed. And that must mean that the parent is fully explained the implication of the use of psychotropics. We have to get our database in better shape and work with other agencies like the Agency for Healthcare Administration to ensure the integrity and usefulness of the data that we have on these children. I've asked our Chief Information Officer, Ramin Kuzkanani, to immediately begin to review our database to make sure that the process by which we're inputting this data makes sense and is as efficient but as user-friendly as possible. We have to get that database in better shape. We are also raising the standards for the performance of our partner agencies. We rely on our partners to do much of the frontline work of this department. In Gabriel's case, our case management was contracted out with ChildNet. Our investigations were contracted out with the Broward Sheriff's Office. And our Children's Legal Services were contracted out with the Attorney General. These partners are really the key to our success. But I want to make something crystal clear.